The topic of today's talk is proof of work and the monument of immutability. I want to talk specifically about immutability and what that means in this new era of digital currencies, what it means to have a digital system that is unchanging. Immutability is a tricky concept. First of all, because it doesn't really exist, right? Everything changes. There is no thing in nature that is forever unchangeable. The universe itself, the vacuum, particles, everything changes. Nothing is immutable. So mutability is really more of a philosophical idea, but we use it in practical terms. So what do we mean when we say immutable in practical terms? The way I like to think of it is, if you have a scale of something that's very easy to change, all the way to the hardest thing you can possibly find to change, the most unchangeable thing, the thing that is most difficult to change, immutability is that side of the scale. Right? So for practical purposes, we'll define immutability in any sense to be the maximum of that scale of how hard it is to change something. And on January 3rd, 2009, that scale expanded significantly, and a new maximum was defined. A new maximum in terms of what it means to be immutable for a digital system. Nothing is as immutable as Bitcoin. So Bitcoin defines the end of that scale at the moment. And so it redefines the term immutable. Now that has some interesting implications, including that you can't call the things to the left of that immutable. You can't call them immutable-ish. You can't call them kinda immutable, right? Immutable-ish is like pregnant-ish, right? It only makes sense as the maximum value, not the maximum minus one. So immutable, once it's redefined, the things below it can't be called immutable anymore. And so why is Bitcoin immutable? What gives the Bitcoin blockchain the characteristics of immutability? What is it that makes it unchangeable? And the first answer that most people go for is the blockchain. The blockchain makes Bitcoin immutable because every block depends on its predecessor, creating an unbreakable chain back to the genesis block. And therefore, if you change something, it would be noticed, therefore it's unchangeable. And that is the wrong answer. Because it's not really the blockchain that gives Bitcoin its immutability. And that's a really important nuance to understand. The blockchain makes sure that you can't change something without anyone noticing. And in security, we call that tamper evident, meaning that if you change it, it is evident. You cannot tamper it without evidence of your tampering. Tamper evident. But there's a higher standard in security, what we call tamper proof. And tamper proof is something that cannot be tampered with. Not just will be visible if it's tampered with, but cannot be tampered with, immutable. And the characteristic that gives Bitcoin its tamper-proof capability is not the blockchain, it's proof of work. Proof of work is what makes Bitcoin fundamentally immutable. And that is a really important concept to understand, because a lot of people are throwing around words like blockchain and claiming that these things are immutable, even though they don't have a proof of work consensus algorithm or any kind of consensus algorithm that gives them immutability. At best, they offer tamper evidence, meaning someone will notice, but they are not unchangeable. This distinction is going to become historically important. Now, you may think historically important, that's a pretty heavy term. Why is it going to be historically important? Because if Bitcoin continues to work the way it's working today, we are introducing a new concept, which is a form of digital history that is forever. And if that history lasts 10 years, that's impressive. If it lasts 100, that's astonishing. If it lasts 1,000 years, it becomes an enduring monument of immutability, an edifice of immutability, a system of forever history, unshakable history. And that is truly a monument of our civilization. And we have to consider the possibility that that will happen. I use the word monument, and I want to expand a tiny bit on that and talk about proof of work. Proof of work was not invented by Satoshi Nakamoto. You can see evidence of proof of work systems throughout human civilization. There is some big pointy proof of work in Cairo. The pyramids. There is some big stone proof of work in Paris, the Cathedral of Notre Dame. In fact, proof of work is something that our civilization does quite often. Let's think about that for a second. The pyramids serve two purposes. The minor purpose is as a religious artifact and tomb for the king. But the even more interesting purpose is a declaration to every civilization and every human that sees it. Behold, this is the measure of the Egyptian civilization. This is what we can build. This is proof of work. You cannot build this on the cheap. You cannot build this in a civilization that doesn't have abundant resources. You cannot build this unless you can feed 20,000 people to not do anything but this. You cannot build this unless you can guard it with soldiers. You cannot build this unless you commit resources for decades or centuries. This cannot be built cheap. And the pyramids stand today as a testament of proof of work for the Egyptian civilization. And anyone, without even understanding what this thing is, riding up in the desert on a camel, going over that hill, and seeing a stone monument that's a few hundred feet in the air, looks at that and goes, wow. And wow is an expression of believing the proof of work, right? Because they immediately and intuitively understand something great built that, and there is no cheap way to do it. The Cathedral at Notre Dame is the same thing. Marshalling thousands of stonemasons over hundreds of years to build a monument to the church, a monument of religion, that made people stand in such awe that they could only even give it divine origin. They could but believe that only a religious order could do something like that. It says, behold the church, what we can do. That kind of open expenditure of resources to make a point is proof of work. And we see this again and again in civilization. But until now, we've only seen it in local environments for a specific country, organization, or civilization. Bitcoin is the first planetary scale digital monument of proof of work. And to those who come later, we will be able to say, behold, this monument of immutability built over decades. Marvel at its function as well as its elegance. Because it has function. Unlike the pyramids and the cathedrals, it serves a purpose, a practical purpose. And that practical purpose is to become a record of history forever. To become the definitive and authoritative source that cannot be modified. The record of truth that cannot lie. And once a transaction is embedded into the blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain, and secured by proof of work, it becomes incredibly difficult to change. This is a thing that most people don't understand. So let's break it down a tiny bit and look at some of the technicals behind it. But Andreas, what if 51% of the miners decide to change it? What if there's a consensus attack? What if a well-funded government invests heavily in hashing equipment in order to go back and change the blockchain? So one of the interesting things you have to understand is the difference between changing the past and changing the future. The consensus algorithm as it is determines the future of the blockchain. If you have a majority of the hashing power on the Bitcoin blockchain, you can decide what gets recorded in the future. But you can't so easily change the past. And the reason you can't change the past is because every node out there is going to still validate every block and is going to demand proof of work. That block still has to carry proof of work. And there is only one way that proof of work can be generated. You have to commit energy resources to a particular block. When you read all of these articles in the media, they say about how wasteful Bitcoin is because Bitcoin is created by burning energy. They are completely missing the point. Mining doesn't work to create Bitcoin. That is not the purpose of mining. Mining is not used to create Bitcoin. That is a side effect. And the way I can prove to you it's a side effect is that one day there will be no Bitcoin, no new Bitcoin. Guess what? There will still be mining. Even after the last Satoshi is mined, mining continues. It must continue because its purpose is not to create Bitcoin. Its purpose is to provide security. Its purpose is to provide validation of all of the transactions and blocks according to the consensus rules. That is the purpose of mining, and generating Bitcoin is the side effect that serves as the mechanism of reward that creates game theory incentives to make sure that the validation is done right. Once you understand that and you realize what we're paying for is security, it changes the perspective slightly. But it's much deeper than that. You see, a lot of different consensus algorithms have been proposed. Proof of stake is one of them. And many of these algorithms use the native asset to stake into the mining algorithm, into the consensus algorithm. Meaning, I'm going to commit X amount of my currency in validating the next block. And if I fail to validate it correctly, I lose that currency. Right? But if I validate it correctly, I gain a small fee. And here's the news. Proof of work is also proof of stake. But proof of stake is not also proof of work. Let me explain that to you for a second, because this is a really important point. When miners commit to a specific block, they're creating a candidate block, they're stuffing in all of your transactions into that block after carefully validating them, and then they take that block and they commit to it by hashing against it, by doing the proof of work mining algorithm. Essentially what they're doing is they're saying, I'm going to stake $1,000 worth of electricity or $10,000 worth of electricity behind the security work I have done. And if I haven't done it right, I lose my electricity stake. So proof of work is proof of stake, because what you're staking is the energy investment committed behind the specific block that you're saying, I have validated correctly. And to prove that I have validated correctly, I am staking an enormous amount of electricity behind that. electricity that costs money. But it's different from proof-of-stake algorithms in other currencies, other digital currencies. And the reason is that what you're staking is not a native asset, is not something that is intrinsic to the chain, whose value and future is determined by the chain. What you're staking is something extrinsic to the system. You're staking energy. You're staking something that has universal value on this planet. The value of the currency tomorrow? Maybe nothing. In which case the value of the stake you made is nothing. But the value of the electricity today, tomorrow, and into the foreseeable future is something. And that means that when you're staking electricity, you're staking something that has value throughout our planet. Proof of work is a lot deeper than we initially realize.
I have a question here.
Let's take questions at the end. So what if the miners decide to do a 51% attack to rewrite the past? Instead of starting from the current block and changing the rules into the future, they can start from a previous block and mine forward. And if they have 51% of the hashing power, they will eventually reach the current block in the minority chain and exceed it. They will win the race eventually. So then the question is, how long do they have to sustain it? Let's take a simple scenario. Let's say we want to go back and change history 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks doesn't seem like a long time. In Bitcoin, it's an eternity. Every day, 500 megawatts of electricity are used continuously to feed the mining process. It's just a ballpark figure. It might be more, it might be less right now. Just use that as a ballpark figure. 500 megawatts in 24 hours is 12 gigawatts of electricity, 12 gigawatt hours of electricity expended per day. 12 gigawatt hours of electricity over 30 days is 360 gigawatt hours of electricity. Over 12 months, that's 3.6 terawatt hours of electricity in a year. 3.6 terawatt hours of electricity is a lot of electricity. But it's only a lot of electricity if you take it all at once. If you take it on a daily basis, on a 500 megawatt basis running forward, it's enough to keep the Bitcoin network secure. But here's the thing. If you try to go change Bitcoin, it starts adding up pretty fast. You go back 3 weeks. With 51% of the hashing power, how long will it take to remine the blocks of the last 3 weeks? Anyone?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. Yeah? Not quite. Some interesting things happen in between. The first week of blocks will take you 2 weeks to mine, and then at 2 weeks you're going to have a difficulty change, which is going to drop your difficulty, and then it's going to take another 2 weeks to mine the next 2 weeks of blocks. So you're going to end up approximately at 4 weeks total to mine 3 weeks worth of blocks. Here's the problem. The other side didn't stop mining, right? At 49%, how long does it take them to mine? So by the time you get to where you were when you stopped mining the majority chain and you tried to rewrite the history, they've also mined at least 2 weeks ahead. If they got the difficulty change too, they've mined even further. So now you have to mine a bit more to overtake them. Meanwhile, the miners who are doing this exercise are earning nothing. Presumably, they're part of the same hashing power that mined the first time around. Presumably, they already had 51% of the power when they were mining the first time around, and now that they're trying to remine the last 3 weeks of blocks, well, they've already banked the rewards, but they've banked them on the other chain. which they're making invalid. So now they're going to get rewards on the new chain, but only if they give up the rewards that they banked on the other chain, which means effectively they're going to spend 3 to 4 weeks at 500 megawatts mining for free. Meanwhile, what happens on the other chain? On the minority chain, you're a 49% miner, and you're now mining a minority chain. It's going to be hard. First 2 weeks is going to be slow. You're going to be doing blocks every 20 minutes. But your share of the mining capacity just doubled, which means your profitability just doubled. So you're getting more reward for the same amount of mining. And if that chain still has value, you're making quite a bit of money because you now have a bigger market share. In fact, the more people abandon the chain, the more profitable it is for the minority. And all you have to do is peel off 2%. All you have to do is persuade 2% of the people who are mining for nothing to come mine on the chain where we're mining for double rewards. How hard is that going to be? Which means that actually sustaining a 51% attack for 4 weeks is brutally hard. Now, of course, that means you'd probably only do it if you had 75%, 80%. Ethereum started with 90. At some point, they went as low as 70% on the majority chain when they did their fork. That's a pretty big drop. So you have these economic incentives that make it very difficult. Now, please notice, I've been talking about 3 weeks. Bitcoin is 7 years old. What if you wanted to change a transaction that was last year? Or a year and a half ago? Well, now the math is really against you. Because it's going to take you almost a year to overtake that chain, during which time you have to sustain that attack and not lose anyone from your group. Otherwise, you never overtake it, and then you make even less money. So now you've mined it twice and gotten 0 reward on both times. Right? And this is the point that we really need to understand about blockchains. There is something inherently interesting about the fact that you can show someone a number and they can calculate from that number how many joules of electricity you consumed to create that number. And it is absolutely unforgeable. That number is in itself proof that you have done the work. That is an incredible artifact for a digital system. The fact that by presenting a number to a system that has never seen the history of the blockchain, that may have joined later, that may be seeing a false history of the blockchain, but you show it a block that has proof in it, and you show that node that number, and they know it's real, and they know it took that much work to produce that number. There is no way to fake it. For a digital system, that's as close to real as it gets. This is a monument of immutability, built block by block. And these blocks are now towering into the sky, 420,000 of them, containing a cumulative amount of work that is absolutely gobsmacking. And it cannot be changed or forged without not only the other person knowing it has been changed, but without you actually expending the energy all over again. There is no shortcut. And that is the difference between tamper evident and tamper proof. You could disconnect from the blockchain today, not look at it for 3 years, come back 3 years later, I can present you a single number and say, do you believe this is an actual block from the blockchain? And you would be able to say with complete confidence, yes. The amount of work evidenced by this block could not have been produced any other way than if during the entire time I was gone, you were expending energy at the predicted rate, and you came up with this artifact. I only need to see the pinnacle to know that it's a real blockchain. Only the last block, one number, and I know how much work has gone into it cumulatively. Because it tends to have ever-increasing work. The longest difficulty chain wins. Bitcoin is not just simply a system of accounting. It is the first digital artifact that provides forever history, that provides true digital immutability. There is no other system that provides digital immutability at that level. It is a planetary scale, thermodynamically guaranteed, self-evident system of immutability. Planetary scale, because in order to do it, you need to marshal resources that only exist in a planetary scale effort. Thermodynamically guaranteed, because you can calculate the exact amount of energy it took to create it, and there is no shortcut. Information theory tells us that to flip that many bits takes this many joules, and there is no way to do it otherwise. Self-evident, because the number that is produced as proof of work tells you exactly how much work has been done cumulatively. And it really is a monument. Now, then the interesting question arises. Can we really afford this? Is this a waste of energy? There is no thing on the planet that produces a digital record that is self-evidently immutable at this scale. Nothing. It is the only platform on which you can embed data that will be guaranteed immutable within a few blocks. 1,000 blocks after you put data in, there's no going back. That data is not going to change. Okay, maybe if you put it in and it's only 3 blocks old, maybe it can change. 6 blocks old, 144, oh, this is getting tough. And that's a day. A week old, done. Done. It's part of permanent history. Our ancestors said, this is as good as written in stone. Our grandchildren will say, it is as good as written on the blockchain, because it is the new standard of immutability and it is globally accessible. Any application can leverage that capability. Other currencies, other chains, smart contracts, they can all checkpoint against the Bitcoin blockchain. And as long as we continue to build the monument, their little inscription, like a piece of graffiti etched into the base stones of the pyramids, will be there, potentially for centuries. And they can import immutability for the low, low price of a transaction fee. That, if you consider it immutability as a service, is an astonishing application. It has enormous implications for software. It has enormous implications for the Internet of Things, for information security, for other systems of currency, for systems of record, title, registration, birth records. History can be written on the blockchain for the low price of a transaction fee, and it may well be there for a very long time, but as long as it's there, it cannot be changed, and everyone can validate it. That is not a waste of electricity. That is the first practical application of digital immutability, and it is expensive, but it's expensive because it's giving us something on a planetary scale, and we only need one, really, and it's probably too expensive to build too. And that just means that the network effect is even more awesome, because we already have one and it's doing quite well. That one can support all of the other applications. The other applications can do much more lightweight proof of stake. But if they really want immutability. Not tamper evident, tamper proof. They need to subscribe to a service on the Bitcoin blockchain. They need to record their data on the Bitcoin blockchain. If you're a banking consortium and you are signing transactions in a distributed ledger technology by taking turns, what is the cost of fabricating the past? What is the cost of rewriting history? Of saying, WikiLeaks never received any of your funds, any of your donations. We reversed all of those transactions. What is the cost of that? Thermodynamically, nothing. In on-chain money, doesn't matter. We created the on-chain money. We can create more of it. As long as there is no proof of work behind it, the cost of rewriting a ledger like that is zero. And if you can, you will. And if you can, you'll be coerced to. And if you can, when you get a subpoena, you must. And so these blockchains are not immutable. These blockchains are mutable as hell. They're fickle blockchains, to go to the other side of the scale. They're transient. They're meaningless. They have no weight of history behind them. They are whatever the last signer says they are. They have no weight. This year, we're at war with Oceania. Next year, we will always have been at war with East Asia. History is written by the victors, not on the Bitcoin blockchain. We don't do 1984 on the Bitcoin blockchain. History is written by the expenditure of real-world energy, and there is no cheap way to forge that history. Thank you.